Welcome back, everyone, and thanks so much for joining me for Chapter 2 of this crash course in opera stage directing. Last week we learned that the primary job of the director is to tell a clear and compelling story. So how do we prepare to do that? Well, just like musicians, we study the score. Yes, I think directors should work from the score and learn to read music well enough to count in basic time signatures and understand basic conventions. The reasoning is simple. As the stage director, you're not just staging the plot or the words that come out of the singer's mouths, you're staging the whole score. If you don't know the score, you limit your own understanding of what everyone is there to work on by quite a lot. You risk losing the respect of your colleagues, and it just makes it harder to see everything in the big picture, to prep for staging non-sung moments effectively, and to communicate the action you want to the singer in non-sung moments. So let's assume that you've been asked to direct something fairly standard. We'll use Puccini's La Boheme. If you don't know the plot of this one, just take a second right now, pause me, and Google it. I'll wait. Okay, so the first thing I do when I pick up a new score is write in my translations above the musical staff, assuming it's not in English. Don't put this off. This is the building block of a lot of the prep that you're going to need to do. If you don't have a literal translation, you're going to need a poetic translation and a dictionary. I like to use both because I can make sure that I understand the literal meaning of each word as well as the poetic gist. So once you've done this, sit down with a good quality recording of the opera and listen all the way through with your score in front of you. Keep a notes page next to your score on which you'll record some initial reactions as you listen. Here are some questions to keep in mind during that initial listen. What jumped out at me, or what stuck with me, both in terms of the plot or just imagery? What were some themes that I noticed coming out in the plot? What was the inciting incident, or the thing without which the plot can't go forward? In La Boheme, it's when Rodolfo meets Mimi. Who was the central character or the protagonist? Is there an antagonist? And they don't always have to be human. It can sometimes be fate, time, disease, or a sea monster. What did I hear in the music that might tell me something about the characters, the plot, or any of the settings? Then go through and assign what's called a super objective to each of the central characters. This is the thing that each character wants or needs the most throughout the entire opera. So for example, Musetta needs Marcello to love her without controlling her. Then once you've done that, go back and review your notes and finally decide, what is this story really about? And the answer can't be a plot synopsis. It's got to be a really strong thematic idea with a point of view that can help you as you go forward and make all the decisions that you're going to have to make throughout this production process. So for example, you could say, La Boheme is about love. Cool, but can you be more specific? What is it trying to say about love and why? A stronger answer might be, La Boheme is a story about the true cost of falling in love, or La Boheme is what happens when we let our fear and jealousy get in the way of love. While I don't disagree with either of these statements, for me, La Boheme is really about loss of innocence. I like this idea because it skews a little bit darker, which is just the way my taste goes, but it also implies a journey from point A to point B, and it involves as many of the central characters as possible. Next, you're going to make a decision about who you think the central character or protagonist is. And you're not concepting yet, so you're just looking at what's laid out in the text for you. Dramaturgically, I think it's Rodolfo's story. We know the most about him and we see the most happen to him on stage. That is kind of a 19th century male gaze kind of interpretation, so later on when you're concepting, if you want to make it Mimi's story, that's great. You just have to first understand what's laid out for you dramaturgically. Next, you're going to decide on the piece's major dramatic question, or through line. Simply put, this is the thing that makes an audience want to keep watching a story. You may think that the Marcello-Musetta relationship is way more interesting than the Rodolfo-Mimi relationship, and that's great. But what are you going to do for an act and a half before Musetta shows up? You've got to find something that's going to keep the audience consistently interested throughout the whole opera. I think it's helpful if the MDQ involves the protagonist, so the simplest one might be, will Rodolfo and Mimi end up together? But if you want to go in a different direction, you could use, will the Bohemians ever grow up and start making responsible choices before it's too late? As you can see, two very different questions that would probably yield two very different productions, and it depends on your point of view. But I would argue that both have textual grounding and support in the text, which is the important thing at this stage. Okay, now that you know the basics of text analysis, don't stop studying the score. Listen to it on the subway and around the house, read the libretto by itself a few times, even grab a friend and read the libretto out loud. And don't let your prep work become too over-intellectualized. Stories, songs, doodles, images, those are all super valid responses at this stage as well. All right, my friends. So next week, we're going to talk just a little bit more about prep work, dive into research, and talk about how to bring designers into the conversation, otherwise known as creating your concept. That's going to be a really fun one, and I hope you'll join me. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook at Boris Directs and message me with any questions. Thank you so much.